They called her worthless. Then they left her for dead in the river. For 3 days, the Kansas sun beat down on her bare skin, cooking it red and raw. For 3 nights, the river water tried to pull her under, to finish the job. She couldn't remember her own name anymore. Just the laughter. Laughter like breaking glass as they tore her clothes away. Laughter as they took everything she had. The world was a blurry, feverish dream. Wagon wheels creaked in the distance, always in the distance, always moving on. She tried to call out. Her throat was a desert. The sound died. She was 16, or maybe 17, lying naked in the mud where the Arkansas River bent around a stand of dying cottonwoods. She was nothing, just damaged goods. Then a shadow fell across her face. She flinched, trying to scramble away, but her limbs were jelly. Her fight was gone. Easy there. The voice was deep, like distant thunder. I'm not going to hurt you. She forced her eyes to focus. A man knelt beside her, his face lined with sun and years. His hat blocked the brutal glare. He was already shrugging out of his canvas coat. It smelled like wood smoke and sage as he wrapped it around her. Name's Owen Garrett, he said, his voice steady. You're burning up. She tried to speak, to say please, to say anything. Don't talk, he commanded, but it wasn't harsh. He slid one arm under her back, the other under her knees. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Maybe she didn't. She felt hollowed out, a husk left behind. I've got a trading post a mile from here, he said, carrying her away from the muddy bank, away from the place she was meant to die. Water, medicine, rest. We'll sort the rest later. As the river faded behind them, she managed one question, her voice a dry rasp. Why? Owen's arms tightened, holding her secure against his chest. His answer was simple, and it changed everything. Because somebody should have stopped 3 days ago, he said. I'm just fixing what they got wrong. But Owen Garrett was wrong. He wasn't fixing a mistake. He was stumbling into a war he didn't know had already started. She woke to the smell of chicken broth and burning cedar. She was in a real bed, under real quilts. Sunlight filtered through a window where herbs hung drying. The fever had broken. Her mind was clear, and with clarity came memory. She wished it hadn't. The door opened and Owen entered, carrying a clay bowl. He saw her eyes were open and gave a slow, satisfied nod. Slept for 2 days, he said, his voice a low rumble. You were talking to ghosts. Shame burned her cheeks. What did I say? Nothing that makes me think less of you. He pulled up a chair. Can you eat? She pushed herself up, clutching the quilt. Someone had dressed her in a clean nightgown, one that was far too big. His, probably. The broth tasted like life itself, rich and salty. She sipped it slowly, fighting the urge to drain the bowl. Where am I? She asked. My trading post, built it 3 years back. He gestured around the small, solid room. You're safe here. You can stay until you're strong enough to decide what's next. I don't have any money, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. His eyes were steady, hard to read. First, you get healthy. We'll worry about the rest later. He was maybe 40, with gray dusting his temples. His hands were scarred from work, but they were clean. Everything about him felt solid, like the limestone walls of the building. Can you tell me what happened? He asked, his voice soft. Only if you want. She looked down at the bowl, watching her own hands tremble. I joined a wagon train in Independence, she began, the story spilling out. My father died of cholera. I had enough for passage to California, a fresh start. She paused, the next words catching in her throat. The wagon master's son. Richard. He said he'd watch out for me. Said I'd be safe. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He wanted things I wouldn't give. So he and his friends, they took everything. Left me by the river. She finally repeated the phrase that had been branded into her mind. Said no one would buy damaged goods anyway. Owen was silent for a long time. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. He just stared out at the dusty trail. They were wrong, he finally said, turning back to face her. You're not goods. You're a person, and you're not damaged. You're hurt. There's a difference. Something inside her chest cracked open. Not breaking, but shifting, like ice on a frozen river. Why do you believe me? She asked, the question raw. You don't even know me. I know you've been through hell and you're still breathing, he said, his gaze unwavering. I know you didn't give up. That tells me plenty. But it wasn't what he knew that was important. It was what he didn't know. What he couldn't possibly know. That the men who left her for dead weren't just cruel. They were careful. And they never left loose ends. Her name was Nora Webb, and for the first time in a long time, she began to feel like a person again. The trading post became her world. A small, safe world of limestone walls and the smell of coffee beans and tanned leather. Owen taught her everything. The Kaw women come on Tuesdays, he'd explain, sorting buffalo robes. They bring beadwork, dried meat. We trade fair. Always. They remember who cheats them. She watched his hands, sure and certain, as he worked. There was a purpose to everything he did. Can you count? He asked one afternoon. Yes. My father taught me. She stopped herself. Talking about before still hurt. He didn't push. He just handed her a pencil and a worn ledger. Good. My handwriting looks like a chicken walked through ink. I need help tracking inventory. The work was a balm. It gave her a reason to wake up, a task that mattered. She learned to measure flour, to stack cans, to smile at the tired faces of travelers heading west. A week later, a family stopped. The youngest child, a little girl with wide eyes, stared at Nora. Are you the trader's daughter? I'm his helper, Nora said, the word feeling both too small and just right. The girl's mother watched her as she wrapped their purchases. When her husband was outside, she leaned in close. You're the girl from the river, she said, her voice barely a whisper. People talk. Nora's blood ran cold. My sister, the woman continued, her eyes sad. She was left behind by a wagon train 3 years back. Different river. Same story. She didn't make it. The woman pressed an extra coin into Nora's palm. I'm glad you did. After they left, Nora found Owen mending a harness. People know, she said, her voice tight. Some do. He didn't look up from his work. Does that change anything? I don't know. Should it? He set down his tools and looked her straight in the eye. Nora, shame only sticks if you let it. You survived something that would have killed most folks. That's not shameful. That's strength. But her strength felt like a house of cards. 3 days later, a freight wagon rolled up. The driver swung down from his seat, laughing at something his partner had said. Nora's breath hitched. She knew that laugh. She knew that walk. He'd been there. By the river. He was one of them. Her hands started shaking so badly she spilled a scoop of cornmeal across the counter. He didn't seem to recognize her. Why would he? She'd been half dead then, just a piece of trash to be thrown away. Suddenly, Owen was beside her. His presence was a solid wall. Go to the back room, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Now. She fled, but she didn't hide. She pressed her ear to the crack in the door, listening, her heart hammering against her ribs. That'll be $2, she heard Owen say, his voice flat. $2? That's highway robbery, the man snarled. Price is the price. Pay it or leave. Nora peeked through the crack. She saw the man slap coins on the counter and storm out. She watched Owen slowly count the money, giving the man plenty of time to get clear. Then he locked the front door. Checked the window latches. Twice. He found her sitting on a flour barrel, trying to will herself to stop shaking. He didn't recognize me, she whispered. I know. Owen crouched down to her level. But I did. A chill went down her spine. What do you mean? His voice, Owen said, his eyes dark. He stopped here a few months ago. Bragging. About leaving some damaged goods by the water for the wolves. He paused, and the air grew thick. I just didn't connect it, he said slowly, "until I saw your face when he walked in." "You knew?" she breathed. "This whole time?" "I knew someone had hurt you bad," he said, standing up and offering her his hand. "But I also know his route. He and his friends won't be welcome here again." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. For the first time since the river, she felt something other than fear or shame. It was anger. Clean, hot, and sharp as a razor. "Teach me everything," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "About this place. About trading. About standing on my own 2 feet." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, reaching his eyes. "Already started, haven't I?" That night, Nora started a new ledger. Not just for goods and money, but for skills learned, for strength rebuilt. She was taking inventory of herself, and she was discovering, piece by piece, that her worth was never theirs to decide. But what she didn't write in her ledger, what she didn't even dare to think, was that the man who had just left wasn't just a monster. He was a messenger. And he was going back to tell the others that the girl from the river was still alive. September came in with a bruised-looking sky. Dark clouds stacked on the horizon, and the air grew heavy, electric. Owen stood on the porch, staring west. "Big one coming," he said. "River's already running high." Nora had learned to read the weather, just like she'd learned to read Owen's customers. By watching, by listening. "What do we do?" she asked. "Prepare," he said, "and hope it passes quick." They worked all afternoon, a silent, efficient team. They brought in barrels, secured shutters, moved sacks of flour to the highest shelves. Owen climbed onto the roof to hammer down loose shingles while Nora held the ladder. They moved with a rhythm born of trust, anticipating each other's needs. It felt like a partnership. "Owen," she said, looking up at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why haven't you asked me? About my life before?" He paused his hammering, looking down at her. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready. And because who you were doesn't interest me as much as who you're becoming." Thunder rumbled, closer this time. The words spilled out of her before she could stop them. "I was trying to get to California. My parents died. I paid everything I had to a wagon master." Owen climbed down from the roof. He sensed this wasn't a story to be told from a ladder. "His son, Richard, he said he'd look after me," she continued, her voice bitter. "He wanted payment I wouldn't give. So one night, he and 2 others. They took me from the camp, took my clothes, my money, everything. Said they'd let the river have me instead." The sky had turned a sickly green. The wind was picking up. "I woke up in the shallows," she finished, her voice a whisper. "Alone. Wishing I'd drowned." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said something that knocked the air from her lungs. "My wife died in childbirth, 7 years ago. The baby, too." Nora stared at him. He'd never, not once, mentioned a wife. "I thought I died with them," he continued, his voice low and rough. "Kept this place running because I didn't know what else to do. Kept breathing because stopping was too much work." He met her eyes, and she saw a deep, old pain there she hadn't recognized before. "Then I found you by that river," he said, "and for the first time in 7 years, I had a reason to care about tomorrow." The first fat raindrops began to fall. "You saved me," she said softly. "No," he replied, his voice firm. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." Then the storm hit. It wasn't just rain. It was a physical assault. Wind screamed, tearing at the roof they'd just fixed. Water seeped under the door, and they fought it all night, side by side. A 2-person army against the fury of the plains. Around midnight, soaked and exhausted, they sat on the floor, their backs against a barrel, listening to the building groan around them. "If this place floods," Nora said, "where will we go?" Owen looked at her, and in the flickering lamplight, his expression was fierce. "Wherever we need to," he said. "Together." By dawn, the storm was gone. They opened the door to a world remade. The river, swollen and angry, had jumped its banks. It had carved a new channel through the prairie. The old Santa Fe trail crossing was gone, washed away. The new path of the river ran 50 feet from their front door. Owen stood in the doorway, surveying the muddy devastation. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "What?" Nora asked, bewildered. "What's funny?" "The new river path," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "It runs right past our door. Every wagon heading west will have to cross right here. They'll have to stop." He turned to her, his eyes shining. "Nora, we just became the only trading post at the new crossing. The same river that had tried to kill her had just delivered them a fortune. The water gives, and the water takes," she thought. "Nora," Owen started, his face suddenly serious. "I've been thinking about us, this place." But before he could finish, a shout came from the trail. The first wagon of the morning, lost, looking for the new way across. Their new life had already begun. She touched his arm. "Tell me later, after we help them." But the storm had washed away more than just the riverbank. It had uncovered something. Half buried in the newly eroded cliff face, not 100 yards from the post, was a small, rotted wooden box. And inside that box was a secret that would turn their newfound luck into a curse. The bell above the door jangled on a cold October morning. Nora looked up from the ledger and froze. Her pen slipped from her fingers, leaving a black spiderweb of ink across the page. It was him. Richard Sutton, the wagon master's son. He stood there, shaking dust from his coat, a cruel, familiar smile playing on his lips, the same smile he'd worn that night by the river. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Little Nora Webb, still breathing, I see." The room tilted. Her throat closed up. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not in her sanctuary. He sauntered to the counter, his boots loud on the floorboards. Each step was a hammer blow to her heart. "Told the boys you'd probably crawled off and died somewhere. Guess I was wrong." "Get out," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Now that's no way to greet an old friend. He leaned against the counter, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your boss around? Might want to warn him about the kind of girl he's got working for him. The stealing kind, the lying kind." Rage, hot and blinding, flooded her veins, pushing back the fear. Then, footsteps from the back room. Owen appeared, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at Nora's ghost-white face, at Richard's smug grin, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Help you with something?" Owen's voice was calm. Deceptively calm. "Just catching up with an old acquaintance," Richard sneered. "Name's Richard Sutton. I was on the train that brought Nora partway west." He chuckled. "She didn't quite make it all the way with us." Owen slowly, deliberately, set down his rag. "Is that so?" "Yep. Had to leave her behind. Caught her stealing from the company supplies." Richard shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "Though I see she's landed on her feet. Or maybe on her back. Is that how she's paying for her keep?" The insult hit Nora like a physical blow. She gripped the counter to stay standing. Owen didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. He just took one step, then another, until he stood directly between Nora and her tormentor. "Here's what I know," Owen said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of iron. "I know Nora Webb is the most honest, hard-working person I've ever met. I know she keeps my books better than I ever could. And I know she has more courage in her little finger than you have in your whole cowardly body." Richard's smile vanished. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying a man who leaves a woman for dead by a river doesn't get to walk into my store and call anyone else a thief." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly. "You have two choices," Owen continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Buy what you need and leave. Or just leave. Either way, you're not welcome here again." Richard's face contorted with fury. His hand twitched, as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. But Owen didn't flinch. He just stood there, a mountain of quiet rage. Finally, Richard spat on the floor. "You deserve each other. A fool and a whore!" He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass in the window rattled. The silence he left behind was deafening. Nora felt the strength drain out of her, and she sank onto a flour barrel, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." "No." Owen knelt in front of her, his voice gentle now. He waited until she looked up. "He ruined things. Not you. Never you." But as he helped her to her feet, his eyes drifted to the window, watching Richard's retreating figure. And a terrible thought occurred to Nora. Richard Sutton didn't seem like the kind of man who traveled alone. He hadn't come here just to taunt her. He had come here to scout, and he would be back. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the shutters like a trapped animal. Inside, the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Owen poked at the logs, his face grim. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at her. Nora's stomach tightened. "Here it comes. He's going to tell me to leave. I'm too much trouble. People are going to talk," he continued. "A young woman, living here with me, unmarried. Richard's lies will spread. It's already started." "I can leave," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I'll go tonight. I've saved some money." "Nora, stop." He set down the poker and turned to face her. "That's not what I'm saying." He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into icy water. "I have a solution. It's not romantic, I know that. But it's practical." He looked her straight in the eye. "Marry me." The word hung in the air between them, shimmering like heat haze. Nora stared at him, speechless. "Hear me out," he said, his voice earnest. "If we were married, you'd have protection. A legal name. A position. No one could question your place here. No one could call you what he called you." Her mind was spinning. Marriage? To Owen? The man who saved her, who taught her, who stood up for her? Would it be real? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked down at his scarred hands. "That would be up to you. I won't lie, Nora. I've grown to care for you more than I ever expected. You've brought this place, and me, back to life." He looked up again, his gaze intense. "But I would never pressure you. We could have separate rooms. Live as partners in business only. Whatever you want." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk your reputation for me?" "Because reputation is just what other people think, and I stopped caring about that a long time ago," he said. "And because you deserve a chance to build something good and safe. Maybe I do too." She thought of the river, of Richard's cruel face, of Owen standing like a rock between her and the past. She thought of the way he never made her feel small, the way he looked at her, not with hunger, but with respect. "I have conditions," she said, her voice finding its strength. He nodded. "Name them." "I want to be a full partner in this business, my say in decisions." "Done," he said without hesitation. "You've earned that 10 times over. And, if I'm not ready, for everything else." "We move at your pace," he said firmly. "Or not at all. Your choice. Always." Tears welled in her eyes. Good tears. "Then yes," she said, a watery smile breaking through. "Yes. I'll marry you, Owen Garrett." A slow, genuine smile transformed his weathered face. He reached out and took her hand. "But I have one question," she said. "Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? Marrying someone with a past like mine?" He held her hand gently, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Nora Webb," he said, his voice soft. "Everyone's got a past. But you survived yours. You walked through fire and didn't burn. I'd be honored to stand beside you." As he spoke, his eyes flickered toward the small wooden box she'd found by the river, the one now sitting on the mantelpiece, the one she hadn't been able to open. He knew something. He knew what was in that box. And the reason he wanted to marry her wasn't just for her protection. It was for his. The Methodist circuit rider arrived on a Tuesday, his horse kicking up the November frost. Nora stood in a new blue dress, her hands shaking as she buttoned it. Owen had bought the fabric from a passing merchant. Simple cotton, but it was hers. Through the thin wall she could hear voices, the 3 Kaw women who were now her friends, a family heading west who'd stayed to witness, old Mr. Chen from the way station down the trail. They were here for her. For them. The ceremony was short and simple. Reverend Mills spoke of partnership and faith as dust motes danced in the sunbeams slanting through the window. Owen's hand was a warm, steady anchor in hers. When the Reverend asked if she took this man, her voice was clear and strong. I do. Owen's vows were a simple promise. I promise to stand with you, to see you, to never let you face the world alone. He leaned in and brushed his lips against her forehead. A gesture of respect, not possession. A promise. After, they shared a simple meal. The eldest Kaw woman, Songbird, gave them a blanket woven with a pattern of 2 streams joining to form a single, stronger river. As evening fell and the guests departed, they sat on the porch, wrapped in that new blanket against the biting cold. "Do you feel different?" Owen asked. "Now that it's legal." "I feel seen," she said. "Like I exist in a way I didn't before." He pulled the blanket tighter around them. "You know what Richard Sutton never understood? Worth isn't something someone else gives you. It's what you build yourself." "I almost gave up," she admitted quietly. "By that river." "But you didn't," he said, his voice fierce. "You held on. That's what matters." She leaned her head against his shoulder, finally feeling safe. The dark ribbon of the Arkansas River flowed below them, no longer an enemy. It was peaceful. It was perfect. And it was a complete lie. Later that night, as Owen slept in his chair by the fire, Nora crept to the mantelpiece. Her hands trembled as she picked up the small, rotted box from the riverbank. This time, the rusty latch gave way. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried leaves, wasn't jewelry or money. It was a small, leather-bound book, a ledger. She opened it. The first page had a name. Elias Thorne, wagon master. Her blood ran cold. This was Richard Sutton's father's company. She turned the page. It was a list of names, girls' names. Beside each name was a location: Santa Fe, Sacramento, Denver, and a dollar amount. These weren't passenger lists. They were sales receipts. Damaged goods wasn't just a cruel insult. It was a business term. The wagon train wasn't just taking settlers west. It was trafficking women. And near the bottom of the last page, she found it. A final entry, written in a different hand. Owen's hand. It read, "Martha Garrett, my wife, sold to Elias Thorne, last seen heading west." The world stopped turning. Owen's wife hadn't died in childbirth. She'd been taken. By the same people who had left Nora for dead. He hadn't found Nora by chance. He had built his trading post on this very spot, on the route Thorne's wagons used, for one reason and one reason only. He was hunting them. And he hadn't just married Nora to protect her. He had married her because she was the only living witness who could bring them down. The air in the small room was thick with unspoken words. Nora stood by the fire, the little black book clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. The truth was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. Owen was awake. He sat in his chair, not looking at her, just staring into the flames. He hadn't been sleeping at all. He'd been waiting. "Her name was Martha," he said, his voice a low, ragged thing. "She was headstrong. Kind. She thought everyone had good in them." He finally turned to look at her, and the raw grief in his eyes was a wound that had never healed. "We were farmers back in Missouri. Thorne's wagon train came through, promising a new life in California. I was going to follow in the spring after I sold the farm. She went ahead with her younger sister." He swallowed hard. "The sister made it to Sacramento. Martha didn't. Thorne's company said there was a cholera outbreak. Said she was buried on the trail." "You didn't believe them," Nora said. "It wasn't a question." "I spent 2 years searching," he said. talking to people who'd traveled with them, piecing together the whispers, girls who just disappeared. Always the pretty ones, the ones traveling alone. He gestured to the box in her hand. Thorn was careless. He dropped that during a river flood 2 years back. I found it half buried in the mud. His whole disgusting business, written down. So he had built this place, a spiderweb on the edge of the trail. And he had waited for a sign, a piece of news, a familiar face. And then I found you, he said, his voice cracking. The same river, the same cruelty. When you told me it was Richard Sutton, Thorn's son, I knew. You used me, she whispered, the accusation tasting like poison. This marriage. It's all a lie. No! He was on his feet in an instant, his hands held up as if to ward off a blow. Nora, that's not true. At first, maybe. Maybe you were just a witness, a way to get justice for Martha. But then, I got to know you. I saw your strength, your fire. What started as a plan became something else. He took a hesitant step toward her. The marriage is real to me. Everything I said, I meant. I will protect you with my life. But you're right. I should have told you everything from the start. I was a coward. The anger she expected to feel wasn't there. It was crowded out by a dizzying mix of betrayal, understanding, and a strange, terrifying sense of purpose. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the key. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady. Now, we prepare, Owen said, his face hardening, the grief replaced by cold resolve. Sutton knows you're alive. He knows you're here. He won't just let that go. He'll come back, and he'll bring his father's men with him. They can't afford a witness. He was right. Richard's visit wasn't a threat. It was a reconnaissance mission. We can't just wait for them to attack, Nora said, her mind racing. The timid girl from the river was gone, replaced by someone forged in fire and anger. We need help. The law in these parts is thin, Owen said grimly. And Thorn has money. He can buy badges. I'm not talking about badges, Nora said, her gaze drifting to the window, toward the distant hills where the Kaw tribe made their camp. I'm talking about friends, the ones who trade fair, the ones who remember who cheats them. A slow, grim smile touched Owen's lips. They won't get involved in a white man's fight. This isn't a white man's fight, Nora corrected him, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. This is a fight against men who steal women. That's a fight everyone understands. She looked from the book in her hand to the man standing before her. They were two broken people, brought together by a river of violence and lies. But Songbird's blanket lay on the bed, a testament to two streams joining to become one. They're coming for us, she said. Let them come, Owen replied. And for the first time, she saw the hunter he truly was. The trading post was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a trap. And they were the bait. The first sign of trouble didn't come from the trail. It came from the river. Mr. Chen from the way station rode in one morning, his face pale and his horse lathered. "Owen! Nora!" he yelled, dismounting before the horse had even stopped. "They found a body, downriver near the bluffs." Owen and Nora exchanged a look. A cold dread settled in the pit of Nora's stomach. "Who was it?" Owen asked, his voice tight. "A freighter," Chen said, wringing his hands. "The one you had words with. The one who was bragging. The man from a few months back. Richard Sutton's accomplice. The first one to find her. His wagon was overturned," Chen continued, his voice dropping. "Looked like a robbery. But his money was still on him. They cut his throat. It wasn't a robbery. It was house cleaning. Sutton was tying up loose ends, silencing anyone who knew Nora was alive and where she was. He was isolating them." That afternoon, Nora rode out to the Kaw camp. She didn't take Owen. This was something she had to do herself. She found Songbird tanning a deer hide outside her lodge. The old woman looked up as Nora approached, her dark eyes missing nothing. Nora didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid it all out. The wagon train, the stolen girls, the ledger, the threat that was coming for them. Songbird listened without interruption, her hands never ceasing their rhythmic work on the hide. When Nora was finished, the old woman was silent for a long time. "These men," Songbird finally said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "They are poison in the water. They spoil the land they walk on." "Will you help us?" Nora asked, her heart pounding. "The river that tried to take you," Songbird said, looking past Nora toward the distant water. "It is our river too. The land they ride across is our land. An attack on your home is an attack on this place." She didn't give a direct answer. But as Nora rode back to the trading post, she saw 3 young Kaw riders detach from the camp and melt into the landscape. They were scouts, watchers, an early warning system. The next week was a blur of frantic preparation. Owen taught Nora how to load and fire a rifle, his hands guiding hers, his instructions calm and precise. Her shoulder ached from the kickback, but she fired again and again, until she could hit a tin can at 50 paces. They barred the windows at night, reinforced the door. They moved the most valuable supplies into the small back room, creating a fortified space. The trading post was no longer a store. It was a fort. One evening, a U.S. Marshal rode up. A tall man with a silver star and cold, empty eyes. His name was Corrigan. "Heard there might be trouble out this way," he said, his gaze lingering on Nora a little too long. "Folks say you're harboring a runaway. A thief." "Folks say a lot of things," Owen replied, his hand resting near the pistol tucked into his belt. "She's my wife." Corrigan's eyes narrowed. "A man named Elias Thorne is offering a reward for her return. Says she stole from his company." "Then a man named Elias Thorne is a liar," Owen said, his voice flat. The Marshal smiled, a cold, thin thing. "That may be. But Thorne's got friends in high places. A smart man would give the girl up, avoid the trouble." "A good man wouldn't," Owen countered. Corrigan stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral." He turned his horse and rode away. Nora watched him go, a new layer of fear icing over the old. The law wasn't coming to save them. The law had been bought. They were completely, utterly on their own. "He was warning us," she said. "No," Owen said grimly, watching the Marshal disappear over the horizon. "He was delivering a message. Thorne isn't just sending his son. He was sending everyone." The very next morning, the first of the Kaw scouts returned. He spoke in a rush of words to Owen, pointing back down the trail. Owen turned to Nora, his face a mask of grim determination. "They're here," he said. "A dozen riders, maybe more." The siege was about to begin. The riders appeared as dark specks on the horizon, slowly growing larger, more menacing. They didn't ride fast. They were confident. They were taking their time. Owen and Nora stood inside the trading post, the door barred, rifles loaded. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the frantic beat of Nora's heart. "Remember what I taught you," Owen said, his voice low and steady. "Aim for the center. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. And don't stop to think." She nodded, her hands slick with sweat on the smooth wood of the rifle stock. The riders fanned out, surrounding the small limestone building. She could see them clearly now. Richard Sutton was at the front, a smug grin on his face. Beside him, an older, harder-looking man she recognized from the wanted posters in town. Elias Thorne. "Owen Garrett," Thorne's voice boomed across the prairie. "You have something that belongs to me? Send out the girl, and we'll let you live." "She's not property, Thorne," Owen shouted back, his voice muffled by the thick walls. "And you're not welcome on my land." "Your land?" Thorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Marshal Corrigan signed the deed over to me this morning. You're the one who's trespassing." Nora's blood ran cold. He hadn't just bought the law. He'd bought their home right out from under them. "Last chance, Garrett!" Thorne yelled. "Send her out!" "Go to hell!" Owen roared. A single shot rang out. A bullet splintered the wood of the door, inches from Owen's head. And then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets slammed into the limestone walls, chipping away stone. Glass shattered as the windows were blown out. Nora dropped to one knee, just as Owen had taught her, and aimed through a crack in the shutters. She found a man reloading, his back to her, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The man cried out and fell. Her stomach churned, but there was no time for sickness, no time for regret. Another rider was charging the door, an axe in his hand. Owen fired. The man tumbled from his horse. They were a team, a well-oiled machine of survival. Back to back, they held the line, the small trading post groaning under the assault. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, noise, and fear. Her ears rang. Her shoulder was a mass of bruises. They were running low on ammunition. Then, a new sound. A crackling, hissing noise. She smelled smoke. "They've set the roof on fire," Owen said, his voice grim. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her focus. They were being burned out, cooked alive. "We have to get to the back room," Owen yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the window. "The walls are thicker. It'll buy us time." They scrambled into the storeroom, barricading the door behind them with barrels of flour and sacks of beans. The smoke grew thicker, seeping under the door. The heat was becoming unbearable. This was it. This was the end. They had fought, but they had lost. Through the roar of the flames she heard Richard Sutton's voice, triumphant and cruel. "It's over, Nora. Come on out and play." Owen coughed, his face streaked with soot. He looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible sorrow. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I got you into this." "No," she choked out, grabbing his hand. "We got into this together, and we'll get out of it together." But she didn't believe it. There was no way out. Then she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard since the day of the storm. A sound like distant thunder. But it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them, coming fast. Owen heard it too. He looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. From the west, a wave of riders crested the hill. They weren't Thorne's men. They were the Kaw. Led by Songbird's son, they descended on the attackers like a force of nature. Arrows flew, rifles cracked. The siege of the trading post had just become a battle for the plains. Thorne's men, caught completely by surprise, were thrown into chaos. "Now," Owen breathed, a fierce grin spreading across his face. He kicked open the barricaded door and they charged out into the smoke-filled main room, guns blazing. Nora saw him. Richard Sutton. Trying to get to his horse, his face a mask of shock and fear. The fear he had put in her. The terror he had made her live with. She raised her rifle. Their eyes met across the swirling chaos. She saw not a monster, but a coward. A pathetic, cruel little man. She squeezed the trigger. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. Elias Thorne lay dead, brought down by a Kaw arrow. His men were scattered, captured, or killed. Nora stood in the smoldering ruins of her home, the rifle heavy in her hands. Richard Sutton lay on the ground a few feet away, clutching his shattered leg, whimpering. It was over. Owen walked to her side, his arms circling her waist, pulling her close. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. They were alive. Songbird approached them, her face serene amidst the carnage. "The river is clean again," she said simply. Nora looked at the setting sun, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of orange and red. The trading post was gone. Their home was a ruin. But they were standing. They had survived. Marshal Corrigan arrived the next day with a posse, expecting to find bodies to bury. Instead, he found the captured members of Thorne's gang tied up and waiting for him. He looked at Nora, at Owen, at the silent, watchful Kaw warriors, and for the first time, she saw fear in the lawman's eyes. He took the prisoners and left without a word. Justice, it turned out, sometimes had to be made, not waited for. In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt. Travelers on the Santa Fe Trail, hearing the story, donated lumber and supplies. Mr. Chen brought food. The Kaw brought hides to help rebuild the roof. From the ashes of the old trading post, a new one rose, stronger and more resilient than before. One evening, months later, Nora and Owen stood on their new porch, watching the river flow by. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture now familiar, comfortable. "Do you ever think about her?" Nora asked quietly. "Martha." "Every day," Owen said. "But the grief. It's different now. It's not a hole anymore, it's just a scar. It reminds me of what I lost, but it also reminds me of what I found." He looked down at her, his eyes full of a love that was quiet, deep, and real. "We got justice for her, Nora. You did." She thought about the girl in the river, the one who believed she was worthless. That girl was gone, washed away by the current. In her place stood a woman who had faced down her demons and won. A woman who had learned that worth wasn't about what was done to you, but about what you did next. The river had tried to take her life, but instead it had given her a new one. It had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life she had built not from perfect pieces, but from the broken ones. She was not damaged goods. She was a survivor. She was a partner. She was home. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her value was never, ever theirs to decide. If you were moved by Nora's journey from the riverbank to rebuilding her life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of impossible survival and unexpected justice.